Okay, everyone, welcome back to the second half of the day, second portion of this conversation about how we can all work together to make HR better, make the world a better place. Really, really excited to have you here. So get all my decks and stuff squared away, ready to go, because we have some good stuff coming up for you from Renee Robeson. So my only regret is that I recorded this with Renee. It was midday for me. It was a Saturday morning at about 4 a.m. for her. So thank you to her for spending time with us for that, but she will not be here live for the talk. That does not matter. Send her nice comments if you like what she has to say, and I think you will. Tell her that you appreciate it, because I know that will make her heart happy. That will help her know that she's having her own impact, her own legacy there. This afternoon, for the second portion of the day, we're going to have a new moderator, Mike Shaw. He's the Oklahoma HR State Director. So Mike Shaw, thank you so much, sir, for being here, for helping out, moderating. We've got a rowdy audience. Just good luck to you for that. No, they've been so kind and supportive all day. I have no reason to think they're going to be anything but that. But jump in there, say hello. I'm sure they'd love to connect with you and to know that you're doing good work. Again, day job, you're volunteering like these other volunteers we talked about this week, and you're trying to make HR a better place. And it's great to see you representing your state here in Oklahoma, here for the world, everybody else here. So let's get this queued up, and I'll get Renee's session ready to go for us, okay? Here we go. Somebody said avocado or pineapple or the code word again. The problem is when I switch from morning to afternoon sessions, that all the settings reset everything. So I apologize for that. Here comes Renee with in the proper formats, the proper version of that. Hang tight. I'll get it shared up here. And do it right this time. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fireside Chat here at HR Summer School, coming back from a break. Going to get you inspired, hopefully excited about the future of what this great profession has for us. We're right now about halfway through the week. And for those of you who've been hanging with us all week long, thank you. For those of you that are just finding us, welcome. We're glad to have you. There's some great things ahead, including this conversation. Really just glad to have you here. So Renee and I have known each other for I don't know how many years now. It's been quite a while. I'm so thankful to know her. She is one of the people that I look to when I want to be inspired. And so I specifically asked her if she could give some more time. She started a new job recently, which we'll hear about in a minute. And she was willing and able to do that, even though this time is not necessarily conducive to her sleep over on the other side of the world where she lives. So Renee, welcome to the conversation. I'm glad to have you.
Hey Ben, it's so lovely to be here. I'm really excited about the event, but also it's always nice just to have a chat with you.
Absolutely. Just a chat, being you with a couple thousand of our friends listening in. No big deal. So tell the audience a little about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I am a Kiwi. I'm from New Zealand and I've lived and worked in Australia for the last 7 years. So quite often people call me an Aussie and I usually let it slide. I've worked at that intersection between HR and learning and development my whole career. And I guess I kind of got into speaking at conferences and blogging and things for my own professional development. So it came from a little bit of a selfish place. And what I found is that my career has grown and developed so much because of this stuff. And I get really excited about, being asked to speak with Ben here because I get so much out of it. But also I look back along my career and so many of those really pivotal points have been because of being able to have a conversation or read about an idea in more detail. And I love this part of our profession. I love that we come together and we help each other.
Absolutely. That's one of the things. I've never thought of it that way, but I was the same all those years ago. I started out because I wanted to know what I needed to know to be able to survive my job and to tell my story and kind of expand my circle. And over time, it has led me to being able to interact with and connect with people like yourself and others. And it started for one reason and blossomed into another. And it's been an amazing blessing for me. And it sounds like for you too. So that's so incredible. Well, it's fun to hear that part of the conversation, part of your story, your personal story, because of what I want to ask you about. So I'm going to flash back a couple of years now. I had you on the podcast, one of the very early guests, and I thought we were going to talk about learning and development because that's your passion, that's what you're great at, that's what you do professionally. And we ended up talking a little bit about what your legacy looks like from a career perspective. What are you leaving behind? And if you're okay with that, I'd like to dig into that conversation with you today and share some of those ideas and get some of that inspiration with the audience. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I can't promise it'll be inspiring, but I'll try.
All of us come from a different perspective, right? And all of us have a different place where we are. Some people, one of the fun things for me, watch people come to the event is some people have said, hey, I'm trying to get into HR. Is it okay if I attend? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Other people are, hey, I'm a CEO, CHRO at a massive organization. I have meetings these days, so I can't be there but I'll be there for other parts of the event. So the people here represent a broad swath of the profession and the function. And that's what excites me about hearing your perspective, because it's going to be able to apply to any of those. So I actually went out and looked up the definition, and I'm going to get it here so I get it just right. Legacy is something that we hand down, something that's handed down to from a predecessor. Okay. So someone handing something down to the people following them. Easy enough. Let's start by kind of defining that. What does that look like to you from a perspective of the function we work in, HR, talent, learning, like rolling those together? What does that legacy look like?
I think it is being able to help people and by extension organizations, but I think it starts with people, being able to help people achieve things. Ultimately, that's what we're all here for. HR isn't a selfish place. Like, people aren't in it because they want to be the person that's doing everything and has their name up in lights. We're there because we're there to help other people do that. And I think ultimately that's what our legacy is. And so sometimes the sign of an amazing HR team or an amazing HR practitioner isn't that you hear about them all the time. It's that you hear about the great things that they enable the people around them to do. So that's what legacy looks like for me. And I think externally, that might be what people see. Internally, in an organization or within the team, it's being able to help that person, that team facilitate greatness. So whether that's because you're facilitating the best and brightest coming into your team, or that's because you are able to really understand what capability uplift needs to happen, or you're one of those HR people who can just get teams humming and address issues early so they don't blow up, so people can focus on what they need to focus on. That for me is what really, really great HR practice looks like. And it's funny when you spoke about that definition about that legacy being handed down. I think you can only build on what's been there before. So one of the things that I think has contributed hugely to my success in my career is because I've had the opportunity to work for and work with people who have made massive steps, like HR leaders who just have known that they need to get the right people in the right position and have been about enabling their team, or execs that just know that getting the right people in and being able to mentor them in the right way is the key to success. So I've really benefited from that. And one of the things that I like to think that I'm able to do with my team and with my organization is be able to pass that on.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll go first so you can think about it in the back of your head while I'm sharing this. But can you think of a person who you're like, when I think about the legacy I'm going to leave behind, the person that was before me that gave me some things? I'll tell you one of the people in my sphere. One of the first HR jobs that I had, my boss, her name is Christine, and she, as you were listing those things a minute ago, the things that matter for our legacy, she was like checking every single one of those boxes. She was the HR leader, and eventually when I took over her role, she became the COO, so moved up to another executive level of the company. But everything she did, every decision she made, everything she filtered through was, how can I make sure that we are lifting up the people around us, supporting the people around us, caring for them, whether on a very specific individual level, supporting whatever their needs are today, or hey, a year from now, putting this thing in place is going to be a pain in the neck. We are going to hate life for the next 2 weeks, right? Because we're working end to end to do it. But a year from now, all of our people are going to benefit from this. It's going to be worthwhile because we can treat them better, we can support them better. And as I think back about the things that I learned about how this works from an HR perspective, the things that I want to pass on to that next generation, those are the kind of things, like, I hope they see that I pick those up from Christine and those pass on to them. Anyone in your professional career, you're like, yes, this person, yeah, absolutely.
It's so hard to narrow that down. So that's my problem with your question is there's too many people that come to mind for me. But I'm going to give quite a specific example. And I used to work at the YMCA, which I know that we've spoken about before. I worked at YMCA Victoria for a few years and I absolutely loved it. And it's one of those things that I look back on my career and I think I'm so fortunate, both personally because I made some amazing friendships there, but also professionally because of what I learned. And I had an amazing HR manager. So the group manager for people and culture was incredible. But I think and it was two people, I'm going to cheat a little bit. The two people that I learned the most from there was a business unit. And when I started, I was the HR business partner. And the executive and the general manager within that business unit were incredible. Their names are Anne and Jared. And they had this style that they they created a culture within their team where mistakes were encouraged because that's how you learn. And everyone, and it was that real embodiment of strength-based leadership and strength-based coaching, where they looked at their team and they went, this person's really passionate about this, or this thing, they are brilliant at it, they don't know it yet, so I'm going to put them on a project and just encourage them. And what was really brilliant about working with them is they helped you do things that you didn't even know that you could do. And Jared has this really incredible but sometimes slightly annoying habit of asking you questions that you don't know the answers to, but it prompts you into a new way of thinking. And I think asking questions is a really underrated, incredibly difficult skill for people to get on. And if you can do that as a leader and be able to ask the right questions of your people, where you can encourage them to go, I think is amazing. And I saw that with the people that they led. They created an amazing group of leaders. And I don't think I've ever been in an organisation where in one group there has been such the perfect kind of conditions for people to be able to step up and take on leadership positions.
One of the things I want to do for people that are listening to this, are like, that does sound amazing. If you've got your own story, by the way, feel free, tell us someone, name that person. If you want to tag them and they're on LinkedIn, tag their name in there. Let them know that that you appreciate them for helping to be part of your legacy, this thing that you're living out right now in your career. So if there's someone right now you want to give a shout out to in the comments, please take a second and do that. That will make them smile, but it'll also, for us, we'll get to see all these amazing examples of people who are doing that. Right. I love that Renee said, well, that's a hard question to answer, not because there's nobody, because there are many people who have had some positive influence on her. And I love, that's a great problem to have, to try to narrow that down and figure that one out. That skill about asking questions that make you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the best leaders I've seen ask you questions that make you reflect on yourself and make you reflect on how you, like you said, you have a strength that you didn't know about, right? And you just got to help, they could help you discover that, and it's there, and you can tap into that. Maybe you don't have the courage yet, or you're not sure about it. You need some confidence. What other things do you think we should be doing if someone's listening to this saying, well, I've never thought about it in those terms, but I want to leave a legacy that I'm proud of, that I can, whether we're telling our kids about our work in HR or not, I tell my kids and they know what I do as best I can explain it to them. But any other recommendations or ideas for people that as where they're thinking like, okay, practically, tangibly, how can I leave that legacy? What kind of things can I start doing today to lead to that?
I think the most helpful thing for me personally has been trying to keep myself in a mindset where I'm continuously learning. So never thinking that I'm the master of something, because obviously I'm not. There's always people that you can learn from, and intentionally seeking that out. So whether that's through trying to engage in a bit of self-reflection. So it sounds really cheesy, right? But doing something like a gratitude journal professionally, I've always found really, really helpful. Being able to take time to think about what you've learned and what you want to learn. And in terms of like educational theory, it's a really critical part of being able to develop your skill set, being able to take time to solidify it and reflect and consider what you might need to learn. But I think as an extension to that, it's also putting yourself in positions where you're a little bit uncomfortable and you need to learn. I think where I've made transitions in my career, the points where I've decided to do that, it's been because I've realized that I need to learn more and I need to grow more. And you know, when you do like a bit of a review with someone and you try and make a professional development plan for them, and you go, you know, you're really great at this and use some extra experience here. Taking stock and doing that with yourself is, I think, is one of the most critical parts of career success. So I've made some moves in my career where they're not necessarily like a vertical move. They're not a fancier job title or whatever, but it's been really driven for me by what do I need to know and who do I need to surround myself with to grow, and what kind of environment am I going to excel in, and where am I going to learn that from? So that for me there's both that, that everyday practice you can do, but also longer term with your decision making, being able to take the ego out of it, and it not be, I want to be a director. It's what do I want to do and what's going to make me happy and what's going to make me fulfill and be a well-rounded person, professionally, but I think personally as well. I don't think that you can separate those two things.
I would agree with that. I don't know that you can be successful totally at one without having some having some influence on the other one. One of the things that you said there just spurred an idea, and then I immediately lost it as I was about to share it. Maybe it'll come back to me. Anyway, I love the idea though of always being learning, always being a little bit self-reflective, right? I need a gratitude journal so I can put your name in it because I'm thankful for you, right? But people who are thankful, people who are grateful, people that have those qualities about them naturally draw in others. They bring others to them because they are more fun to be around, they're more excited to be around, and they are going to make you more of what they are. One of my favorite quotes, early in my HR career, I heard someone say, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I always used to joke, like, some of you need to find more friends. But the reality is, if we want to be like these leaders, like I'm hearing you talk about some of these things, I'm like, well, yeah, I don't do all those things perfectly. I do some of those things well and not all of them, but spending more time around those kinds of people who do that lift you up, that inspire you, will help you to be more uplifting and more inspiring yourself.
Absolutely. I recently changed organizations, changed jobs in the middle of a pandemic, which at the time I was like, is this really the right call? But the perfect role at the perfect organization came up, and I sat down with my husband and I had a chat about it and thought, well, what is it? What makes this the right decision? And it was that I felt that it was the right place for me to be. The manager, someone who's really impressive, who I know I can learn a lot from. But the other thing about the decision was that I'd been working in the private sector, which I'd really enjoyed, at a really values-based organisation. I'd loved it. But this was in the non-profit sector, and specifically working in the disability space. And during a time when I know that their services are even more critical, and it's absolutely necessary for them to be able to have the right supports. And that really felt like a bit of a calling to me of, well, if there's a way that I can contribute, I'm not a medical professional, I'm not on the front line, but this is where my skill set is, and this is where I can contribute something. And it's been 5 weeks, and I look back at that, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I made this decision. It feels right.
You know what? I was going to say this earlier and I didn't, but you said that again. That's brought this up twice in my mind, so I've got to spit it out. I saw someone. I don't know that I've said this week. If I have, everybody else act like it's the first time. Be oohed and awed, surprised by it again. But I heard someone recently say, thank you to all the doctors and the nurses and to all the retail workers in the front line, people like taking care of us right now. And someone else like under that had written, thank you to all the HR people who've hired them and making sure they're employed, making sure they're still paid so they can keep on doing those things they're doing. And you said earlier on, like, we probably are never going to get the standing ovation like the people are that are doing these front lines, but we know who's serving. We are aware. We see within our community who's doing a good job of that. And long term, the kinds of things you're doing in the middle of, whether it's this situation or another crisis, whether it's small or large in your company, that kind of thing is going to be part of this lasting legacy that we leave behind.
I think it's one of the really lovely things about working in HR is that you are in that, how someone's a sign writer and they drive past a sign and they go, I know exactly what went into the creation of that thing. Well, yes. When you work in HR, you know what it is that goes into people's jobs and how much learning is required and upskilling and commitment and how hard it is to get to where they've been in lots of different industries. And so one of the kind of gifts I think we've got is that you're able to recognize when people do really great things and when people are at the forefront of what they do, and you recognize the effort that goes into that. And it's really quite a great thing to be able to come home and feel good about, is that you're able to, I think you see a goodness. I think there's a reason why people in our profession generally are positive, sometimes annoyingly so, like happy people, is because you feel really grateful because you see people at their best a lot of the time. And yeah, we sometimes see people at their worst, but we get the opportunity to see people at their best, and people who, most people just want to do a great job and be well liked and work really hard, and we get to see that every day, and it's a nice reminder. And I think during, crazy global pandemics and normal life, you get to see that play out, and you feel really grateful for it, that we are surrounded by good people.
You downplayed at the very beginning of this the whole idea that you were going to be inspiring, and yet in spite of that, I think you really were inspiring. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate you. Hey, in spite of your belief that you could not be inspiring, you have been, at least to me. I'm going to speak for everybody else that's listening in right now and say you've inspired all of us to some degree. Thank you so much, Renee. If someone wants to connect with you, learn more about the work you're doing, reach out, just say, hey, you got me to think about my own legacy and what I'm leaving behind. What's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Look, I would love to chat about that. LinkedIn, definitely, but the golden rule, always include a cover note when you're doing a LinkedIn connection request. I'm also on Twitter, a little bit less nowadays, but I am still there, and I have a website, reneerobson.com, where I will occasionally write screeds of musings.
Awesome. I'm in it though. I appreciate your time. If I had a gratitude journal, I'd be writing your name in it. Maybe I need to get one. That'd be a good exercise for me too, probably. But I really appreciate you spending some time with us. This has been very helpful.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more of the speakers on the lineup.
Awesome. Thank you. To everybody else, thank you for joining us this fireside chat. Stay tuned for more HR Summer School coming right up. So I told you it was worth the wait. I told you that would be incredible. And I'm watching the comments, the conversations going on, the hundreds of you who are in the chat right now saying thank you to Renee for sharing that with us. I joked with her, right? You didn't think you were going to be inspiring, and yet I knew it would be really powerful. Such a wonderful message. And it's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day, to just be stuck in the details, and I've got to do this and I'm going to do that. And here's my task list. And we don't always stop and think about what's coming in the long run. What are we going to look back on and be proud of from our career perspective? And so definitely, if you tag someone that you work with or someone who's had that influence on your legacy, your own career through their legacy, I think that's expansive, then make sure you thank them. Send them a note, even outside the live stream here. Send them a text today. Just say thank you for what you've done, for that impact. I know probably surprising, unexpected, and that's what really makes it impactful. So please take a second and do that today. I would appreciate it. I know the person that receives it would as well. And as you heard from Renee, that kind of thing makes you a more grateful person just by doing those kind of things. We're going to transition. We're going to hear from Heather Tinsley-Fix. So Heather and I met a year or two ago. I walked up to her at a Sherm event and I was like, hey, interface. And I told you guys this week, I'm kind of shy in person. And I walked right up to her and she's like, okay, who is this person? And I had seen her speak at another conference and was really touched by what she said, but I had to run to another session and missed getting to meet her after hers. So it was I was like, oh, that's her. And I grabbed her in the hallway and we've become friends, have had her on the podcast. I've talked a lot about the work that she does. She actually works at AARP and does a lot of work with employers on how to hire people who are in that upper age bracket, people that might be pushed out of their jobs or forcibly retired or all those other things that happen. And she's going to talk about the value and the impact of longevity on talent. So let's get me out of the way and bring Heather into the conversation.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Ben. I am coming to you from Washington, D.C. Kind of a gray day. It's good to be with everybody. I want to thank Ben Eubanks and Upstart HR for inviting me to be part of HR Summer School. And today I'm going to be talking to you about an interesting topic, which is longevity, and particularly the impact of longevity on how we view talent and how we view work and working. So let's get started. So first, I thought I would go over longevity by the numbers a little bit, give you some sort of context for what I mean by longevity. So this is a chart of average life expectancy gains for the last 120 years. And you can see this very steady uptick in the average life expectancy of people in the United States. And it's a pretty, it doesn't look really that dramatic, but for life expectancy gains, it's actually pretty unprecedented. If you take a look at, let's look at 1920, from 1920 until 2020, we gained 26 on average, 26 years of life expectancy. So 26 more years of life over the course of 100 years. And just to put that in context, between the 17th and 18th century, people globally gained about 6 years of life expectancy. So you can tell that this has been a huge sort of takeoff and curve of gaining in life expectancy over the last 100 years or so. And actually between 2000 and 2015, so a 15-year period, the growth in life expectancy was the fastest since the 1960s. So basically, as healthcare improves, our access to good, not only good healthcare, but understanding things like access to clean water and the need to stay sanitized, so stuff like that, our life expectancy has gone up and infant mortality has gone down. So this means that we are all living longer on average. In addition to that, we're also staying healthier for longer. So the World Health Organization reported that between 2000 and 2015 in rich countries, the gain in life expectancy of 3.7 years on average, of those 3.7 years in good health. So we're staying healthier for longer as we live longer. So those are two gains to us as human beings, which is good. This chart shows the proportion of the US population that have no health-related limitations on their ability to work or to do housework. And what's expected is like sort of in the 51 to 54 range here. You can see 89% of people report that they don't have any health-related limitations. That makes sense. But as you go along the age curve and get older and older, you can see that there is a drop, but it's not as dramatic as one might think. And in fact, people 85 plus, over half of people 85 plus, don't report having any limitations on their ability to work or to stay in their homes. So we're staying healthier for longer. I did want to mention, however, that unfortunately, with regard to these gains in both health and life expectancy, there are still disparities. Your life expectancy rate, range differs by age. I'm sorry, by race, by gender, and by geography. So you can see that when viewed, if you go county by county across the United States, life expectancy can vary a lot, as much as by 20 years. And what this says to me in terms of our work in HR is that diversity is even more important than ever in terms of making sure we have thriving and diverse workforces to increase that access to good wages, good healthcare, and the things that help increase our longevity. Another thing that is affecting the population in the United States is that birth rates are declining. So for the first time in history, by 2035, older adults will outnumber, so adults 65 plus will outnumber children 18 and under by 2035. And the median population age is expected to grow to 43 by 2060. So we are seeing an effect on the population graphs that used to be sort of, a pyramid where you have lots of babies at the bottom. And then as you go up the pyramid, there's less and less people, right, as the age goes up. And now that demographic, or that graphic is looking a lot more like a column, right? So people are living longer, as I was saying, and birth rates are declining. It might even sort of start to go a little bit like this, a little bit inverse. But anyway, birth rates are declining, and what that means is that we're not going to be able to fill all of the jobs that we have after things start to recover, which is sort of, we're talking in sort of big, decades-long periods. We're not going to have enough people to fill the jobs that we have just through the existing working age population alone, which means the working age population is going to need to extend. And it's possible for that to happen because we are healthier and able to contribute so much longer than we used to be. So in 2016, there were a pair of economists out of the London Business School that wrote a book called The 100-Year Life. And it's a really great book. I recommend it. It's very interesting. And their central thesis was the current way that we sort of order our lives, which is 3 distinct periods of of getting educated, so going to school and getting a degree or graduating from high school, working for a big chunk, and then retiring, is not going to be feasible in a new age where we're living to 100. So I'm not sure how many of you have children under the age of 13. I do. I have a 7-year-old, and I tell him this all the time. There's a very good chance that any of the kids in the US right now who are 13 and under will live to be 100. In fact, half of the babies born after 2007 are predicted to live until 104 in the US. And you can see this matched globally as well. So this time of living to 100 is coming, it's upon us. And that really does affect the way we look at our careers and our workforce. In addition to living longer, there are also starting to be whispers of reversing age, like when you talk to futurists and people that have really like cool and interesting things to say about like what's coming in down the pike. There is a man called Stephen Horvath. He is an epigeneticist. Don't ask me to say that again. He's at UCLA, and he's discovered a way to measure the age of a person's cell, like at a cellular level, to measure that using DNA. And this discovery was called the Horvath clock after him. And so this man, Paul Hynek, was one of a group of 9 people who participated in an experiment. Took about a year, and it involved taking a combination of medications that already exist. And he was able to reduce his biological or his cellular age, if you will, by 2 years. So he is 57, but his cells or his body is in effect 55. So this is very interesting and sort of science fiction, and sort of seems like, how can this be? But people, I mean, sort of in the aging community, this is starting to be discussed. Can we reverse aging, and how much can we do it, and do we even want to do it? So I just wanted to go through all of these slides to give you a sense of the fact that longevity is here to stay, and we're all going to be affected by this. So one of the effects of increased longevity is certainly workforce demographics, US population, and also specifically the working age population. So I thought I would ask everybody a quick poll. What percentage of the workforce is composed of millennials? Is it 80%? There was a Gallup poll a couple of years ago that stated that 80% of the workforce is millennial. 52, 35, 48. I'll just let you type in your answers and see what you come up with. And the correct answer is 35%. So 35% of the workforce currently is in the millennial generation. So, and you can see this spread of 5 generations in the workforce currently. And this is different from about 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, there were only 3 generations in the workforce. There's Gen X, there's the traditionalists, the silent generation here, the boomers, which is a big group, love boomers, there they are. And then Gen X, my generation here. But now that we're 20 years on, we've got Gen Z coming in, and we still have some of our silent greatest generation, often called traditionalists. There's still some of those with us. And then the bulk of the workforce, of course, is these 3, Gen X, Boomer, and Millennial. But as you know, Gen Z is starting to enter the workforce, and we're starting to pay attention to them as a cohort. So what I just want you to take away from this slide is that as longevity impacts demographics, the workforce is becoming more generationally diverse. In addition to that, the workforce as a whole is aging. So as we saw back a couple of slides ago, with the birth rates declining, that means that the workforce in general is aging. Workers over 55 are the fastest growing segment of the workforce. that doesn't mean that right now, because we're in kind of unprecedented times, as you all know, that the workers 55 plus are actually having, in the workforce or have jobs, but they're available. They're part of the available labor pool. And in fact, 65 and older, you can see here, is even more quickly growing. So the number of people in the US working over the past the age of 65, at least pre-COVID, more than doubled in the last 20 years. So I wanted to go over one more section before I sort of talk about what does this all mean for the way that we look at talent. So the skill landscape. Right now, I created this presentation before COVID hit, but I do think that when we sort of ride this wave and things start to recover, it's going to take a while, obviously. But the types of skills that are going to be needed, the increase in automation of our jobs, those kind of things are not going to stop. So I still think there is some relevance to these slides. And the availability of needed skills in 2 years in a row in PwC's annual CEO survey were listed among the top 5 threats. So we've talked about this for a long time, right? The war on talent, this war on skills. Is there a skill shortage? Yes, there is. No, there isn't. I mean, I personally think that there is a degree to which there's a skills mismatch of the kind of skills that are coming out of education, university, and high school, and the kind of skills that are needed in a very fast-paced, changing environment where adaptability is the key to innovation. And you can see here that the types of skills that are not only very important, but also difficult to find are a lot of the soft skills, so human skills, essentially. And those are things like collaboration, adaptability, leadership, emotional intelligence. And those are things that are hard to teach in school, right? Those are things that you tend to learn over time on the job. Another force that is driving this need for human skills, if you will, is that much of our job tasks are if they're not being automated now, they're being investigated as to how they can be automated. And McKinsey analyzed work activities of more than 800 different occupations to figure out how much of the job tasks in a given occupation could be automated. And understandably, predictable, rote, rule-based work is something that can more easily be automated, but even some of the tasks associated with stakeholder interactions or managing other people or analyzing data, for example, we outsource a lot of our decisions already now to algorithms. And so a lot of the tasks that we do in our job could potentially be automated, which means that the type of work that's left to do is the work that is what I would call uniquely human. It's the collaboration, and it's the judgment and the discernment. It's fixing the algorithms when they go wrong. So these are the kinds of jobs that require soft skills as well as technical skills. This is just another example of showing the demand for human skills that will increase as we move into 2030. You can see here physical and manual skills, basic cognitive skills will decrease. The need for those will decrease because a lot of this stuff will be able to be automated, whereas higher order cognitive skills, and particularly social and emotional skills, in addition to obviously to tech skills, right? Those needs are going to increase. And things like problem solving, critical thinking, empathy, building relationships, those things are, as I was saying, they're hard to teach in school. They're hard to teach sort of not in a not applied setting. And so the workforce or the workplace is where a lot of these skills are going to need to be developed. So given all of this and talking about human skills, I have another question for you. So at what age do you think our brain power peaks? Is it 20, which is kind of the received wisdom? Is it 30, 40, 50? What do you guys think when do you think your brain power is going to peak? I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to answer. Well, the answer to this question is none of the above, right? So this is what we used to think. It is still pretty much true about different types of brain activity. So there's sort of for a while, we divided intelligence into two categories. There's fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. So fluid intelligence is essentially speed, throughput, like the ability to process information quickly, the ability to store and recall information, but not so much the ability to contextualize or figure out what to do with this information. It's, obviously that's growing in the brain, but it's not at its peak yet. After 40, crystallized intelligence starts to take over and become the dominant sort of way that the brain processes things. That tends to be slower, more able to synthesize, the ability to take new information and put it in context and understand it in context. Judgment as a skill increases sort of after 40. This is the path that we've been comfortable with this model for a long time. But we now know that, in fact, there are more than just two types of intelligence. There's a whole slew of types of intelligence, and they peak at different times. So, for example, fluid intelligence peaks at 20. That's what we used to think of as brain power, essentially. Like, that's why the received wisdom was, oh, your brain peaks at 20, and then it's all downhill from there. But that's not, in fact, the case at all, which is good news for us. So, like, executive functioning peaks at 29. Our ability to read emotion peaks at 48. Learning new information at 50. Vocabulary at 67. The moral of this slide is don't play Scrabble with anybody over 67. But my point is that there's all different types of intelligence, and they peak at different times. And so this myth that our brains start to decline after age 20 is just a myth. We are always able to learn from the time we're born until the time we die. So, okay, so I've been talking a lot about things like longevity and staying healthier and how our brains can continue to learn as we age and how the workforce is aging. But what does all this mean for how we look at talent? How do we view talent and the work that we do and the workforce in general? How do we view that? Well, I've got sort of 4 things that I want to mention about this. And the first is that age inclusivity is imperative. It's going to become, I believe, of course, because I work at AARP, I believe it's imperative now. But as you saw, the workforce is aging, birth rates are declining, the workforce is more generationally diverse than it's ever been. And so we need to consider age in the way that we think about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. It's just super important because that is the workforce. What does this mean? Well, it means that it's not all about millennials, even though millennials are great. And they're the biggest group in the workforce, and they're very important. But I love to poke fun at this, at Mark Zuckerberg, because when he was 22, he famously said that people under 30 are just smarter. And then he turned 30. In fact, now he's 36. And so I'm sure he has adjusted his opinion about that. But my point is that I think we can over-focus on the younger parts of the workforce and not as much pay attention to mid and late career workers, who have a lot to offer, just as much as the younger counterparts who have a ton to offer us. And it's funny, I actually was at SHRM Diversity and Inclusion last year, so October of 2019, and I went to a session on generations in the workforce because, that's my jam. And I was amazed to see that the presenter talked about Generation Z as being innovative and dynamic. And she did not talk about millennials or Gen X or any other generation that way. And I thought, wait a minute, millennials are still innovative. I mean, we've been talking about how they are for 10 years, and they are still innovative. Why is it now like, it's only the youngest generation that can be innovative? So I just thought that was kind of amusing. Anyway, but the fact that our workforces are age diverse and it is good news because there's a lot of good things about an age diverse workforce. One of the things, and I'll talk about this a bit later, is that research shows us that mixed age teams are more productive. The productivity of both older and younger workers rises if you have a mix of ages in your teams at the team level and in your workforce in general. Older workers tend to be rich in these human skills that we're talking about. So 40 and up, right? And by the way, the first millennial will turn 40 next year. So that the first wave of millennials turning 40 happens in 2021. And that's a great thing because there's so much that older workers can bring to younger workers and vice versa. And in fact, AARP research shows that 7 out of 10 workers enjoy working with people of other generations. And then additionally, as I was saying before, workers 50 plus will make up 35% of the labor force by 2026. Another really important reason that we should pay attention to age diversity in our workforces is because the longevity economy is huge. So spending by people 50 plus amounted to 7.6 trillion in 2018, and it's predicted to go as high as 27.5 trillion by 2050. And what this means is that you need a good range of ages in your product development, in your marketing, in your consumer, in your what's the word I'm looking for? In like your customer service. You need a whole range of ages because you're trying to reach a range of ages with your products and services. And this market, particularly 50 plus, is highly lucrative. So what are the implications of the need for age inclusivity and how longevity impacts that? Well, the bottom line is that age diversity is good for business. It needs to be part of our thinking about inclusion, as I was saying. It's also the one aspect of identity that we all share. In all ages, all ages bring something to the organization, and as we age, we have people who've gone before us to help us understand what it's like where they are. So it's unlike race and gender and other elements of identity, age is something that is common to all of us. Experience is valuable. We talked about that. That's sort of where you develop your skills in terms of professionalism and leadership and judgment. But learning is perennial. Anyone can learn from anyone else. You can have an 86-year-old learning from a 22-year-old. We just have to give them the opportunities and the safety, the sort of psychological safety to share knowledge and to learn from each other. The second thing I wanted to mention about the impact of longevity on how we think about talent, and I kind of alluded to this earlier with the 100-year life, is that more and more we're going to need to have non-linear, multi-stage careers. We will simply not be able to finance, if we're going to live to say 90, a 35 or 25-year long retirement period by working for 35 or 40 years. It's just not possible. So this is how it's been for a long time, how it used to work. I mentioned this before. There's sort of 3 distinct phases to our lives, right? We are born and we begin to be educated around age 5, go to university maybe, or graduate from high school and start working. And then there's this hard line and you work, and you work, and you go up the ladder, up, hopefully, up the ladder. And then there's another hard line and you retire. Boom, you're done, no more working. And that worked for a while because our life expectancy was, in the high 60s to mid 70s, right? So you don't have a terribly long time to finance retirement. But that's not going to work if we live to be 100. So how it needs to work is that we're going to need to sort of blur the lines between these 3 periods so that we have periods of learning, we have periods of working, leaning into work, and we have periods of rest where we lean out and maybe care for others or care for ourselves or develop new skills. So interestingly, millennials have anticipated this shift, right? So they know that they're not going to work full tilt until 80 years old. That's just not feasible. And when they were asked, this is a Manpower survey, when they were asked about whether or not they would take time off, significant time off, which is 4 weeks or more, many of them said yes. In fact, I'm highly unlikely to take 4 weeks away. Only 11% of women and 20% of millennial men thought that they would not take a significant career break. So what are the implications of this aspect of the impact of longevity? Well, I've heard this phrase before, I can't remember who said it, but careers are going to, we should start to think about careers and about our workforce in waves, not in ladders of constantly just going up and up and up. And I'm not going to lie, this is a big shift. It really requires new ways of compensating talent, recognizing talent, because not everybody's going to be able to just go up the ladder. Maybe the ladder is not going to be as much of a thing anymore. I don't know. I still think there's going to be hierarchies at work, but if you're going to have someone stay in the workforce longer, you're going to need to have different ways of rewarding talent. There's a really cool company called Huntington Ingalls, and they make ships for the US Navy, and they love to have their people stay for a long time, and they have a designation called Master Shipbuilder, which is a way for them to reward and recognize talent that's been there a long time. So those are kind of some ideas. I am running out of time, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. Another implication is we'll need to work in order to learn, not learn first in order to work. So training and upskilling are going to have to be continuous. I am indebted, by the way, to Heather McGowan for these slides. She's fantastic. You should check her out. So the old model we talked about, learn, work, retire. There's this emerging, what she calls a faulty logic model, which is like work for a bunch, then take 3 months off to retrain, and then work for another 20 years. And her whole thesis is that we're going to need to have these, the blurred lines where you move in and out of training and working and resting. And in fact, work itself will need to be part of our learning. 4-year degrees, you all know this, I'm sure, in the talent acquisition community, that it's not that they're going away, but they're just diminishing in importance. Some fields have skill landscapes that are changing too rapidly for traditional 4-year models. So, and I like this quote from Tim Cook. He said this last year: about half of the people employed by Apple in the US last year, so in 2018, did not have a 4-year degree. We're going to have to pull apart our identity from a job and be more, or your professional identity is going to be more about what value you're creating, what are you working on right now, who are you working with, as opposed to what do you do or what do you want to be when you grow up. Half the jobs, probably more than half the jobs that will exist when our kids are of working age don't exist now. So there's going to be a bunch more blurry line between working and learning. Micro-credentialing is going to become more important. New partnerships between academia and businesses, where their pipelines are built sort of directly from like community colleges into jobs at an organization. Talent management's going to need to have, I'm not sure how this would work because I know it sort of doesn't really work anymore at Google, but like fallow periods where employees can acquire new skills. And then the last implication I want to talk about is that understanding teams, to me, is the most interesting thing going on right now. I think it's going to be the new talent metric. So this is a great quote, but I'm not going to read it because it's very management consulting-y, but I still like it because it talks about how work in the future is going to be more team-based, more collaborative. I'd mentioned this a couple times before. Research shows that age diversity improves team performance. It not only does that, so the productivity of both older and younger workers goes up, but it also suppresses turnover. And part of this, of course, is that in a company where engagement is high and inclusion is part of the DNA of the company, turnover does go down. But age diversity in particular, due to the fact that knowledge spillover tends to happen, it's called knowledge spillover, but like knowledge is shared from older to younger and younger to older, that seems to be the thing that improves team performance. But I think more research needs to be done on this. This is a fantastic TED Talk by Margaret Heffernan. It's called Super Chickens. You may have already seen it. It's been viewed like 3.5 million times. But her whole thesis in this, in miniature, is that it's not about high performers or single heroic leaders. It's actually more about the social glue that holds us together, the bonds that we have at work with our colleagues, and how that is actually what creates higher performing teams than just assembling a whole bunch of high performers together. I know it seems crazy, but she has this great phrase, it's the mortar, not just the bricks. So what are the implications of this? Well, I don't really have any. I just actually have more questions about this. So for example, what metrics should we apply to teams? And what should we continue to apply to individual performance? How do we actually measure the value of, like, the business value of knowledge spillover? This to me is super important because if we can measure that, we can start to value the things that the tacit knowledge that older workers bring and that mid-career workers have and late career workers, that can become in and of itself a way of valuing, compensating, and recognizing people without necessarily having to promote them. And then how do we leverage equity and belonging to create the safety that we need to increase engagement, collaboration, which is so important, and knowledge sharing? So I'm going to just sum up, and then I'm going to see if there's any time for questions. I'd love to answer some more of your questions if you're chatting them. So we're living longer and staying healthier for longer. Longer lives require a much more flexible approach to living, learning, and earning. So nonlinear, multi-stage career is going to be the new normal. There are lots of advances in automation. And I really think that's going to continue as the recovery of our economy comes back online and businesses start to reopen. I think automation is a train that can't be stopped. And so that's what that means, is that human beings are more important than ever in order to judge, to make meaning, to create breakthrough innovation, to stimulate productivity. And these are the kinds of activities that require all those human skills we were talking about: collaboration, adaptability, wisdom. And last, we need to look beyond the stereotypes of aging that limit us as human beings, because we need everybody at the table. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Ben and Upstart HR. I'd love to take some more of your questions now.
That was so much fun. I love to see the different speakers take a different approach. And we had Renee and I kicked it off with a conversation that was all about the heart, the emotions, empathy, and all those things in leadership. And then we go straight to Heather talking about the data, the numbers, the metrics, the evidence that helps us to shift and influence how we lead people. So that was so much fun. I really enjoyed that one. Next up, we have Sarah Morgan. She has what is a straightforward compliance topic about family leave. But when we're talking about what she should cover, she's like, this is what people are dealing with right now. People are struggling with this. They want to know some more about this. They want to understand this. And that's where her heart is. So I'm thankful that she said, hey, let's do that. It's really funny, very short story. Sarah started out her online blogging career as an anonymous person. And the very first out-of-state speaking event I ever did in my entire life, terrified, shaking my boots, like, why am I even here? I shouldn't be here. That's how I felt. And she was actually an attendee at that event, and we ran across each other in the hallway. We talked a little bit, and I got to meet her before she was out publicly telling everyone who she was and her real name and everything. And that's how every time I see her or talk to her or see her picture, that's what I think of, is that time all those years ago, meeting her in person. And she's a wealth of information. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from Sarah. She's a great force in our community and someone who I appreciate for what she's doing and what she will continue to do to support everyone out there. Here we go.
Hello, HR Summer School students, and welcome to the do's and don'ts of FMLA. I am your session leader, Sarah Morgan. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a practicing HR executive with nearly 20 years of light industrial and retail industry experience. Currently, I am the Chief Excellence Officer for Buzzaroonie LLC, where I help small and mid-sized businesses create inclusive workplace cultures so that they can maximize their growth and profitability through attracting, developing, and retaining diverse talent. I also still serve as an active HR practitioner as the Group Director of Human Resources for a national retail services organization based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a bachelor's degree in communication studies and organizational communication with a focus on leadership from the University of Richmond, as well as a master's degree in human resources management. In 2011, I started blogging under the pen name Buzzaroonie, which was a spin on my childhood nickname. Eventually, I retired that, but my blog is still 9 years old and continuing strong with over 10,000 readers a month. And now I have about 5,000 readers a month on my newsletter, 8 on the 8th. In 2019, I launched my podcast, Leading in Color, where I'm providing advice and interviewing experts about cultivating intentional positive workplace experiences through equity, fairness, and inclusion. And now I keynote conferences and have been featured in publications. I've been named on a bunch of lists, Unstoppable Women in HR Tech, Top HR Influencers, Global HR Voices, Best HR Practitioner Blogs, consecutive years. And when I'm not working, which feels like never, I am a wife and a mom with a blended family of 5 in Durham, North Carolina. Today, I'm here to talk with you about the do's and don'ts of FMLA. And I want to begin by going over the objectives for the session. The first thing is, my slide's not working. The first thing we're going to do, forget the slides, all right? The first thing we're going to do is get you familiar with the FMLA, including the new emergency FMLA guidance that was released in April under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, as well as the states and the cities that are making expansions to their leave laws. Next, I'm going to give you some practical advice for handling challenges with the FMLA, especially where it overlaps with things like the Americans with Disabilities Act and workers' compensation leave. And finally, I'm going to help you get away from that potential risk and the fear of liability from the mismanagement. There are a ton of horror stories of organizations out there that are facing expensive lawsuits and serious public embarrassment over failure to properly handle FMLA requests. And I don't want your organization to be one of those. And hopefully by the end of this time we have together, you'll feel better equipped to administer the FMLA so you won't become one of those cautionary tales. So let's start with what is FMLA. FMLA stands for Family Medical Leave Act. It was passed into law in 1993. It was written by the National Partnership for Women and Families, led by then California state level Congresswoman Maxine Waters in 1994. And it took almost 10 years of lobbying to get it passed as a national law when it was finally signed by President Bill Clinton in August of 1993. The FMLA was conceived as a way to ensure women would not lose their jobs when newborn care was needed or other family caregiving responsibilities had to take them out of the workforce temporarily, and as a way to establish protections for both men and women who were dealing with certain family circumstances and serious personal health conditions. I love that the FMLA was built gender neutral so that the act would not only legally pass muster, but also highlight that women should not be the only ones taking time off from work to care for new children or seriously ill relatives. And today, the FMLA entitles any eligible employee of a covered employer to take unpaid leave with protection of their job and health benefits for certain family members and medical reasons. So what does an eligible employee of a covered employee really mean? So if you are in the public sector, meaning state or federal government or some kind of related government agency, you're a covered employer regardless of your size. But if you are a private employer, you become covered when you reach 50 employees or in 50 employees in 20 or more weeks in a calendar year. So let's say you have 35 employees January through March, but then your busy season is April through October. So you spike to 55 and then in November you drop to 40. You would still be covered because you reached 50 for 20 work weeks in that calendar year. When in doubt, consult with your legal counsel or err on the side of caution by assuming that you're covered and granting the leave. If you're an employer working for an eligible employer, then you have to be there for 12 months before you are FMLA eligible. And this could be any combination of 52 weeks where you received pay. So let's say you work for a company for about 6 months, about 2 years ago, and then you left for another job and now they've hired you back and you've been back for 9 months. The employee has a combined 12 months of employment. So all of that time counts. However, an employee also has to have 1,250 hours in the preceding 12 months in order to take leave. So regardless of whether they're full-time, part-time, seasonal, whatever, the only thing that matters is the hours. 1250 is roughly about 25 hours a week. So it is possible for someone who is not regular full-time to still be FMLA eligible. And lastly, 50 employees have to work within 75 miles of a work site. If you're a company with multiple offices, you may have a small office in a state where you don't have 50 people. So employees at that location may not be FMLA eligible. However, if you have teleworkers or outside sales or traveling groups, the radius for that group is determined actually by the place where their assignments come from. So if your main office has 50 employees, your teleworkers, your outside sales, even if they work virtually, are covered too. The other thing is that FMLA is for certain family and medical reasons. These are the reasons that an eligible employee at a covered employer would be permitted to take FMLA. Birth of a child, that covers both parents, birth of not just the mother, and also care within the first year, placement of a child through adoption or foster care. If you yourself have a serious health condition, or you need to care for your spouse, child, or parent with a serious health condition, and lastly, a qualifying exigency for covered active military duty. I want to point out to you that there are states with their own laws for FMLA, as well as those with current pending legislation. This chart came from the Bloomberg Law website, and it does a great job of illustrating this. So this particular map is from 2019. Not much has changed from this map in 2020. Washington State, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, District of Columbia, and California are still the only states with current paid family leave. Because we only have 30 minutes together, I'm not going to go deep into the working of each state's law. Just remember there'll be some Q&A and the chat, and maybe some time at the end. If we run out of time, I will make sure that I get to all of your questions, even if I have to do so in a separate forum. What I will say is that all of the states have similar requirements to be eligible and paid for benefits as the federal act. And all of the states allow your federal FMLA to run alongside any state paid family leave. Many employers worry that if your state allows 16 weeks and the federal FMLA has 12, you're going to have to keep your employee out for 28 weeks. You can do that. I'm not saying that you can't, but you don't have to. You could run them concurrently, knowing that your state will allow them an additional 4 weeks. I'll also say that the process and paperwork for employees to receive paid benefits at the state level can be cumbersome. And for some of the states, cumbersome is kind. If you have eligible employees in a state with paid leave, be prepared to work alongside them to help them through the bureaucracy so that they can get their benefits. So I want to talk about emergency FMLA under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was passed in March 2020 to help American workers needing time off from work due to the coronavirus pandemic. The focus was to make sure that those who had children whose schools had closed or child care centers closed were given job protection. So from April 1st of 2020 till December 31st of 2020, the FFCRA expands FMLA to include any employee who has been on payroll for 30 days prior to the leave, including any time spent work as a temporary employee. It grants emergency FMLA leave when an employee is needed to care for a child related to a public health emergency. And this applies even if the employee has telework options, because just like me, many of us are working at home and trying to supervise your children and guide them through remote learning, and that's not easy. And while the emergency FMLA doesn't specifically have requirements for intermittent leave the way that the original act does, I strongly encourage employers to be flexible with your employees during this time to make sure that they can achieve the work-life balance that they need during this pandemic. The FFCRA also provides paid leave for your employees depending on the size of your organization. We're not going to get into that today since our focus is on family medical leave. However, I did want to encourage you to read up on the paid leave provisions and how they apply to your company if you haven't already done so. This brings me to my first list of employer dues. There will be a few more do's and some don'ts for you to follow, but the first is to post a notice of FMLA rights. The FMLA is like minimum wage or overtime. It's a federal law, and your employees are entitled to it. That means that you are required to have a poster. Most of your labor poster vendors will have the FMLA in your all-in-one posters, but you can order them separately, or you can download a compliant poster from the DOL website. The next due is making sure that you write an FMLA policy. This is also required by the law. If you are a covered employer, you need to have a written policy in your handbook, and it has to be made available to your employees or any enforcement agency like the DOL or EEOC. The DOL has a free guide for you to create your policy if you haven't already created a written one. The next due is documenting your FMLA process. This isn't required, but it is one of my recommended best practices. Most small and mid-sized companies don't receive a whole lot of FMLA requests. And when you don't get it, you can't practice it. And if you don't practice it, you don't get good at it. And that's how you make mistakes. And those mistakes can be costly to you and to your employees. So have a written process for what you're going to do when an employee notifies you of the need to take FMLA. The final due is making sure that you cover any state or local regulations surrounding FMLA in your policies and procedures if that's applicable. If you have a business and you're covered in the states that we've mentioned before, you need to make sure you have a plan for how you're going to handle that so that both of those get covered. The same goes for workers' comp leave or ADA or the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. These are the common intersections where we see HR get stuck because we don't know and we don't do it enough to be proficient at it and we don't plan for it. So I will also add to have in your policy and procedure how to handle the intersecting benefits like short-term disability, long-term disability. If you have voluntary AFLAC type of benefits like critical illness, your employee will be making claims for these usually at the same time that they're setting up FMLA. So you want to set them up to be successful and have the process be smooth. Um, Usually when people are coming to you for FMLA, it's a stressful time in their life. And so you don't want at a time where they're already stressed about themselves being sick, the birth of a new child, the sick family member, you don't want to add to that by complicating your process and making it difficult for them to get the benefits that they need. So make sure that you have a plan and make sure that you're keeping that front of mind. Now let's talk about how employees make FMLA requests. As employers, we want the employee to make their request super clean and specific like this. However, what we don't get is this. Employees don't have to be super specific about receiving an entitlement. They're required to give you enough information as the employer for you to know that the issue is covered by FMLA. So what we want is the statement on the right, but what we get looks more like this, right? And that brings me to our list of dues number 2. FMLA, I will say again and again, is an entitlement. It's like minimum wage or overtime after 40 hours. Employees do not have to be specific about requesting something that they're entitled to. The burden is on you as the employer to make sure that nothing is done to impede or hinder them from utilizing their entitlement. And that's why training your management staff is so important. Oftentimes, the employee tells their supervisor when they're sick or when their family is going through some kind of crisis, and that counts as notification to the company. If that supervisor doesn't know to tell HR, you could end up out of compliance, and that could mean hardship for your employee and liability for your company. So be prepared and know that what we want FMLA requests to look like is not what they're going to look like. And then we can educate the managers within our company to recognize the signs and respond. I want to add another point on FMLA as an entitlement. The Department of Labor issued an opinion letter last year, and it's still a very important decision for us to take note of. In the letter, the DOL says that because employees are entitled to FMLA, the employer cannot deny designating a protected leave, even if both the employee and employer want to. So once we're notified, we have to provide the designation letter within 5 days, and we can't use PTO or state-sponsored sick leave to extend an employee's leave. The DOL says the two have to run concurrently. Now, if you have business operations in any of the states that you see listed on this slide, you need to consult your counsel about how to coordinate state-sponsored leave with the FMLA, because the Ninth Circuit Court decision made in Escriba versus Foster Poultry Farms says that employers have the choice. And now that's in conflict with the Department of Labor guidance. So it's important to get some legal guidance before you make any policy decisions in those states. Once you know the reason the employee is going to be absent from work is likely to be covered by the FMLA, your next step is certifying the leave. If the employee is taking the leave for someone other than themselves, you may need to document their family relationship. If they're taking leave for themselves or someone in their family with a serious medical condition, you need to document what the condition is. Remember that serious means that it will keep them out of work for 3 days or more, or will cause periodic absences or a need for a change to the work schedule. If the employee is taking leave for military exigency, you may need to document that step as well. And that brings me to my first list of don'ts. The first thing is, don't only communicate verbally with the employee. In fact, the FMLA has record-keeping requirements for employers. And in order for you to be in compliance with that, you have to exchange written communication with the employee needing to use the leave. I recommend taking the time to make a note in their file, send a quick email to them summarizing every conversation you have with them during their FMLA issue. From the moment that you are notified, start your documentation trail. The second, do not bog the employee down with forms. The Department of Labor offers forms for you to use as a guide, but they're not required. In fact, some doctors will charge employees more for having to fill the forms out. So you don't want to force that on your employee unless you're reimbursing them for that cost. We're going to talk in a moment about what makes for a sufficient certification, but know that you can accept a doctor's note that is not on the DOL form. You can also send correspondence to the employee that is not on the DOL forms. You use the form as a guide, but you want to make the communications personalized and consistent with your company's culture. FMLA is scary enough without adding those stuffy forms on top of it. And the last don't is, do not ignore timelines and deadlines. Familiarize yourself with the timelines and deadlines required of you as an employer of when you have to respond. I recommend creating a checklist of when things have to be done and saving that as part of the documentation in the employee's file. And then you can set calendar alerts for yourself to remind you when to do things when an FMLA issue comes up. If they really need FMLA, they're going through something serious, and you don't need to be badgering them for information or looking like you don't have your stuff together. Don't make it harder on them by failing to follow the calendar that's been given to you. So let's talk about the FMLA certification. As I said, it does not have to be on the DOL form. That is a guide. What does have to be provided is the healthcare provider's name and contact information, when the condition began and how long it will last, if the employee is the one needing the FMLA, or whether it will be a member of their family, and whether it will be continuous leave or intermittent. If it's a family member, again, you've got to have the frequency and the duration of their condition. And in both cases, certification has to give you enough medical facts about the symptoms and number of doctor's visits needed. Everybody gets FMLA. But that brings me to my second list of don'ts. You cannot require a diagnosis on the certification form. The goal of the certification is to get enough information to conclude that your leave is covered. The doctor and the employee do not have to give you a specific diagnosis and all the medical details. In order for you to reach that conclusion, the employee is still entitled to their medical privacy. You also cannot refuse the certification based on its format. I've heard of people denying doctor's notes and demanding the Department of Labor form be filled out. That is a violation of the DOL guidelines. The certification document has to give all the info that I just mentioned. It does not have to be on a specific form or in a specific format. And lastly, you cannot regulate certification. Usually the certification will tell you how long the condition is going to last or when the next follow-up appointment will be. That's your best guide on how often to ask for updates. Don't automatically say it has to be 2 weeks or a month. The DOL says that's too much. And it's impractical. If you have an employee who is pregnant and you get the certification in month 5, 2 months later, guess what? She's still pregnant. There's nothing new for you to know as long as she's pregnant and having a healthy pregnancy. So recertifying is a waste of time. And it puts undue stress on the employee again at a time where they're already dealing with something major. So be sensitive and practical about how often you require those updates. Here's where you want to make sure that you do these things. You want to designate it as FMLA. The DOL provides you a form to use as a guide for that. You want to document the FMLA. If you have physical files or electronic files that more than your HR team has access to, you want to make sure that you save those separately. And you want to determine the FMLA year. FMLA is 12 weeks in a 12-month period and 26 weeks for military care or military exigency. You have to define what that 12-month period will be. Is it a calendar year, an anniversary year, 12 months from the start of the leave? You spell that out for yourself and for the employee. You decide that. And last, do use caution when asking for a second or third opinion on FMLA. You want to be cautious on pushing back and asking a lot of questions of the healthcare provider as well about the info that they've given you. If the fax is unclear or if you can't read the handwriting, that's one thing. But when it starts to look like you're challenging the diagnosis or the course of treatment, you're getting into dangerous territory. So be careful with that. When it's time for the employee to return, I generally recommend a fitness for duty release. That's a simple note from the treating physician saying that the employee is able to return to work without restriction. Also, when the employee comes back from FMLA, the law says they have to be returned to an equivalent job and with equivalent compensation unless no such position is available. Then you have to offer them the closest thing that you have to what they were doing before or release them from employment. And this is why most people just hold that same position for the person until they get back from FMLA. You can divide their work up, you can bring in a temporary worker, but once they come back, their job is theirs. And also reinstatement of benefits is required. Most employers continue health benefits during this time, and the employee is responsible to pay their premiums. Other benefits have to be reinstated as well. I'm talking about stuff like PTO, reimbursements, benefits and perks that are based on tenure. FMLA is like pushing pause. It doesn't restart the clock and cause employees to lose any benefits or perks they've already gained. Which brings me to my last list of don'ts. Don't retroactively designate FMLA without giving the employee the right to appeal. Sometimes the employee or their supervisor doesn't tell HR right away that they need FMLA. It may be a few weeks, sometimes even a month before we find out and go through the certification process. And then we want to go all the way back to the beginning. In some cases you can do this, but in other cases you cannot. The DOL guidebook for employers is pretty clear about those circumstances. Make sure you review that before you retroactively designate FMLA, and make sure you give the employee the right to appeal. Don't force light duty. If the doctor says an employee can work 3 hours a day, but the employee says they would prefer to be out for the whole day, don't force the issue. Suggest that they go get an updated note, but don't try to make them work or discipline them. Remember, FMLA is an entitlement. If they want to use it, you should let them. And lastly, don't cancel health insurance without notice. FMLA is unpaid. Employees may not have sick time or disability benefits that they can use to pay for their premiums. Don't combat stressors by adding a lack of health insurance or reversal of claims or things like that at a time where they're probably going to need it. So go above and beyond to try to make payment arrangements with them so they can keep their benefits while they're out and settle up on back premiums when they come back. In the interest of time, I'm not going to deep dive on the other leaves that intersect with FMLA, like USERRA, workers' comp, and those things. The most important thing to remember on this is that they can absolutely run concurrently with the FMLA as long as you have notified them in writing that that's what you're going to do. And your notification has to be timely and in compliance with the DOL guidelines. And that's the place you really want to cross your T's and dot your I's to make sure you're not violating any guidance. If you are unsure, err on the side of caution, give the employee the benefit of the doubt and more time and flexibility to them, because that will make sure you're upholding the spirit of the law, even if you're not 100% in line with the letter of the law. Don't forget also that FMLA can be used intermittently. So what this means is the employee is eligible, but they don't have to be out for full work days. They can take FMLA in smaller increments. Full days and partial days count towards the 12 weeks. But I don't want to end our time together without at least mentioning intermittent FMLA, even though we can't deep dive into it today. So to conclude, I want to remind you that FMLA is not as scary as you think if you and the people who supervise people are informed and prepared. Also, you have to communicate consistently in writing, document, document, document. Not just to cover your liability, but also because your employee is stressed and people who are stressed get forgetful. So just help them by keeping that clear. And lastly, this is a time to show compassion and concern and to show that your employee is committed to looking out for their employees in their time of need. So make their burden lighter, not heavier. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so I won't be able to take questions, but I will still answer anything that's come through in the chat. And if I miss anything, I can do it in a special version of my newsletter, so be on the lookout for that. I invite you to connect with me through my website, buzzardmooneyllc.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter, learn more about my blog, my podcast, and my hashtag movements. I'm in the middle of a series right now on reopening our workplaces after coronavirus. And I have some exclusives that are only available there. So I encourage you to join my community. I promise I'm not going to spam you. I just want everyone to make work better. And I'm just committed to that. And I want us to be a strong HR and give practical and real tips for how to navigate the issues we face every day, just like I've done in this presentation. You can also follow me on social media. I've got that listed there. And remember, any questions that I don't get to in the chat will be gotten to at a future date. And I thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Sarah. Goodness, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions. People are still, I saw those still coming in as that was finishing up. So continue to ping Sarah with your questions, your comments, your kind words, because that was very informative. We appreciate you, Sarah, for sharing with that. Our last keynote session today, focus session. We have one last fireside after this. Our last keynote session today is with someone who I've been following, listening to for over 10 years now. Paul Hebert is an expert on incentives, on influence, on how we can connect people, how people can influence others. And he uses that force for good, never for evil. And I've learned a lot from him, watching him over the years, seeing him share insights, distilling a bunch of research down to practical things that we can use. And I'm excited to see him share some of those ideas with us in the coming 20 to 30 minutes or so. So hang tight. I'll get Paul up here. I'm so thankful to have you here, sir.
Talk about today. We're here to talk about influence and incentives. So that's the topic for me today. My name is Paul Hebert, as Ben said. I work for a company called WorkStride. We created technology that helps enable the best incentive programs in the world. Some of the things, my background, I've been interviewed by the USA Today a few times on how incentives work, especially back in 2008 when we were going through the last go round of problems in the financial world. I've talked to the BBC about executive pay and how that can influence people's behaviors. And I've been interviewed and done work with Bloomberg Business Week. I write at Fistful of Talent on a regular basis, as well as HR Examiner. So those are kind of my bona fides, my background. Today's discussion is going to be on influence and incentives. And I think too often we think of influence in this vein, right? It's something heavy-handed, something that is obvious and easy to spot. The reality is influence is a very subtle science. In other words, when we talk about influence, we're not talking about using blunt instruments like that. We're talking about not pushing and not forcing, but as much as nudging, helping collaborate with people to get them to move their behaviors, connecting at a different level and influencing people as opposed to actually, leveraging a big heavy bat. So really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is hacking into the human operating system. That's the way I look at it, is because we're talking about the psychology of people. And psychology is kind of that operating system that drives the way we make decisions and the way we are influenced on a day-to-day basis. And it's a very interesting process of our human software and how it works. In fact, it's also, I would say, hard to get into, but at the same time easy. And what I mean by that, there was a great book written called Change or Die about how to change your behaviors. And they talk about how difficult it really is to change behaviors. So let me ask you a question. One of the things they studied in here is people who had heart attacks. And when they go to their doctor and the doctor says to them, you need to change your lifestyle or you will die. And they studied that process of people having a heart attack, being told that if they didn't change their behavior, the way they lived, they would die. So the question I ask you is, what percentage of those people do you think actually change their behavior? I'll give you a second to think about that before I go to the next slide. Because the human behaviors we're talking about that drive how you respond to diet and exercise are the same behaviors HR has to deal with when you're talking about things in your world. It's the same operating system. It's the same human OS, if you will. So the answer, simple. When given the option to change or die, 90% chose die. Now, they weren't really choosing die. What they were choosing is, I'm not going to change my lifestyle. I'm not going to make the changes necessary for me to actually live. That's an astounding figure. That's how difficult it is to get people to change their behavior. The human operating system exists on purpose to keep us alive. But at the same time, today's world doesn't necessarily work with yesterday's operating system. We'll talk about that in a minute. So thinking in terms of that, how hard it is to change behavior, the second thing I want to make sure you understand as we get into this is that changing the behavior is difficult and it's never a perfect science. Human beings are the most variable things in the world. If you think about it, I can be a different person from the 8 o'clock when I arrive at the office to the 5 o'clock when I leave the office. In between there, those hours at work, I can be 10 different people. Between Monday and Friday, I can be a completely different person. And that's because I'm a reaction to everything, right? How I behave can be a reaction to how I was treated at home versus how I was treated at work. So human beings are the most variable thing in the world. And a lot of times we hope that we can apply the same thinking that we do to the machine shop floor or the factory floor, or if we just tweak a few dials, we can dial in the machinery. Well, in HR's world, human beings are the machinery, and we don't have an owner's manual like that. You can't dial me in. The best thing I can hope to achieve with this conversation today with you, and what you can achieve in the future if you apply some of the things I'm talking about, is you might be able to get the house edge. Meaning you'll be able to, on average, influence behavior better than you did before. So please, at the end of all of this, don't call and say, hey, Paul, I tried some of these techniques and it didn't work. They're not going to all the time. Remember, 90% of the people who are told they will die if they don't change their behavior didn't change their behavior. So none of these are foolproof. They all can be used together or alone to help you increase the odds of that behavior changing. So what are we talking about? What are the things that actually do jump in and change behavior? Well, the things that you want to look at, we're going to talk about today, are cognitive biases. Our brains make decisions in very specific ways. Social psychology. There are ways that because we're social animals, we react to things in a specific way. And if you know how that works, you can kind of get in there and hack. Behavioral economics, something you've probably heard a lot about lately. Behavioral science. We're starting to learn that people respect and react to very important triggers. And finally, what motivational things drive behavior. I don't try to delve too deeply into the whole motivation side of things, because motivation is typically something we think we can give people or do for some people, but it isn't. Motivation is something I do for myself in most cases. The best thing you can do in HR is give people the environment that's necessary to be motivated. So I don't touch on too much on the whole motivation side of things, but really focus in on the cognitive biases, social psychology, that kind of thing. Now, first and foremost, I'm not like the world foremost expert on this. I like to say an expert is nothing more than somebody who's read one more blog post than you. In a lot of cases in today's world, that's true. All these theories I'm going to be talking about, I think ways to hack that HR software, human software, come from basically a few books. Social psychology side of things is really this book by Dr. Cialdini, probably and arguably the #1 book on how to influence behavior. He kind of started the whole process. He looked at it through a social psychology lens. But over the last 10 years or so, 15 years, there's been other books that have come out. Fooled by Randomness, Sway, Predictably Irrational. These are all great books around how the human brain works. In other words, how the software works. And they're really good for learning about the ways in which you can change your approach to achieve higher levels of compliance and change in your organization. I do find it interesting that HR is typically 100% responsible for change in the organization, but it doesn't have these tools and doesn't use these tools. So let's get into it a little bit. So first and foremost, before we get started, let's set some ground rules about humans. And I think that's important that you all know this. People are irrational. We don't like to believe that or understand that. We like to think that if we approach them in a rational fashion, that they'll be able to just see through the discussion you're putting in front of them and react accordingly. But people are not rational. And let me just give you a quick snapshot into how irrational we can be. They did an experiment a few years back where they asked people in 2 different groups to go into a room and on a computer use the mouse and drag circles from one side of the computer screen to the other. Very simple task, obviously, right? So they did that, but they gave it 2 different groups, and they gave each group 3 different incentives, if you will. The first group, group 1, they said, go in the other room and drag these circles for 50 cents. And then they had another group on that side that said, go in there and do the same thing for $5. And then they had another control group where they didn't give them anything. Now, obviously, the other groups don't know about each other. The second group, they said, go in the other room and for a Snickers bar, a little fun-sized Snickers, drag circles. They told another group, here's a Godiva chocolate box, go in there and drag circles. And again, a control group where there were nothing given for the effort. And when they went through and they counted up how many circles people moved from one side to another, it was pretty evident on group one that 50 cents, $5 drove behavior, but also nothing drove behavior. In other words, by offering 50 cents, they actually got less behavior than by offering nothing. And it was really interesting when you think of it in terms of the non-compensation side of things, the non-cash side, or the non-dollars. They had pretty relatively similar performance levels, 162, 169, and 168, meaning there was no real difference between all of them. They all performed at the top of the charts. So they started thinking to themselves, what could be causing this? So they looked at it again, and this time they took that first group that was a 50-cent group, and they changed the second group's wording. And what they said was, go into the other room and for a 50-cent Snickers bar, drag the circles over. When they changed those words, the results were remarkable. Basically, adding the words for a 50-cent Snickers bar changed the outcome. Those words basically reduced performance by 38%. So the mere mention of money had a negative effect on the outcome of the experiment. And that's not unusual. It's not unusual at all. Because when we put things in terms of money, our brain goes into transaction mode, and it goes into, they have different categories, we have different buckets of decision-making, and money brings out a very cynical decision-making process. So when you're thinking about things in terms of the rationality of the discussion, remember, just adding the words 50 cents to a conversation can drop performance by 38%. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about social psychology and how that influences behavior. Social psychology in the book, Cialdini's book of Influence, is kind of positioned as something he called click-whir responses. And what he means by that is that we don't really think about our responses when given a certain situation, especially in the social side of things. We respond like a tape recorder where somebody does something or says something, and then somebody presses these two little buttons and the tape runs, click-whir. Now, in today's world, we don't see very many cassette tapes anymore, so it's kind of an old and outdated analogy, but it's kind of fun to show this to 30-somethings and ask them what it is when I'm doing the stand-up version of this. But either way, what it means is that I'm going to react in a certain way without almost not thinking about it. And some of the ways that we're going to talk about today are reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, and my absolute favorite, social psychology hack, human operating system hack is the word because, and we'll talk about that in 2 seconds. So first of all, reciprocity. What does that mean? Well, reciprocity means giving and receiving, right? So it's like when you get a gift and then you reciprocate for that gift. They did a study at hotels, right? And you've all stayed at these hotels, that they will say, they will look hard there that says, we'll make a donation to a charity for saving water if you reuse your towel. And they did that. And they got about a 38% response. Then they changed the wording on that. Instead of saying we will, which is kind of if you do this, I'll do that, they changed it so we did make a donation already. So when they changed that to we did make a donation, there was a 48% return on that. So if you do the math real quick on that, that's basically a 26% increase by just changing it from will do it to did do it. Now, the important thing to recognize here is this is not an incentive. This was saying, I've already done this. I've already made the donation, and now I'm asking you to help me out. That's the reciprocity part of the equation. Because an incentive is saying, if you do this, I will give you X. And again, thinking about how irrational we are, the first setup there was, we will donate if you do that. The other ones, we already did donate it. So the incentive actually had less of an impact. So keep that in the back of your mind. Now, how do you use this in HR? How can you leverage this idea of reciprocity? Well, in some cases, it's pretty simple. And I know I said money changes things, but it doesn't, it does if it's an incentive. But on the reciprocity side, you can include, how many times have you gotten a survey with a $1 bill attached and felt guilty that you didn't fill it out because you got the $1. It wasn't the amount, it was the fact they gave you something up front. Or in marketing, a lot of times they'll say, here's a white paper, now go fill out our survey. Or I'm going to provide you with a diagnostic tool or some sort of free software, or we've donated $10 in your name. So from an HR perspective, when you're talking to your employees, is there something you can offer up front saying, hey, we added $5 to your blank account, health savings account, or something for your response to this? So think in terms of, is there something you can offer an employee as a prepayment, so to speak, on the behavior you're asking them to do? So think about reciprocity when you can, right? The second social psychology thing that I find very interesting is this idea of commitment and consistency. And I don't feel like we leverage this very much. The theory behind commitment and consistency, or I should say the studies behind it, show that when I commit to a behavior ahead of time, even if it's way ahead of time, even if it's a smaller version of the ultimate behavior, I'm more likely to do that behavior for a variety of reasons. One is I committed, and B, because when I commit, I want to remain consistent with that. So when the time comes to actually do something, I'm feeling a little bit of a tug to do that. And the experiment they ran, I thought was ingenious, and it was really interesting, is they went to a beach and they had two groups of people. One was the people that set the stuff down, and then another group that came in and took the stuff. So in other words, what they did was they had people come in, set up their towel with the cooler and the umbrella and everything else. And they said to people sitting next to them, nothing. They just got up and walked away. Then they had another group of people in on the experiment come by and steal all their stuff. And what they were looking for is, what did the people do that were sitting next to them? So they set it all up and walked away, and then they had people come in and steal it all. Well, when they did that, 20% of the time people stopped them. Or to put it this way, 80% of the time people did nothing. They watched it happen, knowing that it wasn't their stuff, right? So then they changed the experiment, and before they left to go do something, they said, hey, will you watch our stuff for a few minutes while we go and do this? And when they did that, what happened was they had now a 95% commitment. The only difference was they had asked people to help in the process. They had said, will you do this? And the people said, yeah, sure, we'll take a look. We'll watch that. And now they were at 95% compliance. So when you think about commitment and consistency, we don't very much ask people, will you commit to something? So think about it in terms of the ability to say, look, if you look back on historical things people have done and connect to that, saying, I know in the past you've been very supportive of these kinds of events, we'd like your support in the future. Or because somebody has sold 100 units in the past, asking them to sell 100 again is not a big stretch. Look at what they've posted online, social networks, potentially on your internal intranets. See where their heads are at, or see what the general feeling is if you're doing a mass discussion with the employees. But in other words, what you're trying to look for is, what does history show you that you can leverage that people will want to remain consistent with? So if your organization has a history of doing X, that's something you want to lean into. You want to say to the group as you're putting together the next request for behavior change, and this applies as well at the enterprise level as well as with individual managers. If one thing I would teach managers all this stuff, because they're going to be doing this one-on-one, but if I know what your history's been, I can lean into that a little bit. I can set goals against that. So think in terms of what people have done in the past and know that they're more likely to try to achieve that in the future or something similar because of their past history. Hope that makes sense. I'm rambling a little bit here because there's no real good audience. So that's commitment and consistency. That's reciprocity. Another one that I'm a big fan of because it's highly, highly effective is something called social proof. And basically all social proof says is that we're social animals. We don't like to be outcasts, right? We don't like to be different. And the truth is when we're given the option to do whatever we want, we typically look around to see what the other people are doing, right? And a dramatic experiment that proves this was something called the Asch conformity experiments, where they asked people to say, they look at the line all the way on the far left and say, okay, looking at that line, is it more the size of line A, line B, or line C? Now, looking at that, and since there's nobody there influencing you today, you would look at that and say that line on the left is probably more like line C in size. If you had to pick one line, you would pick line C, correct? Well, it's kind of funny. When they ran this experiment the first time with no pressure to conform, only 1% of the people chose the wrong line. And that could have been, I guess, their glasses were bad or something. But with no pressure, they just picked the right line. But when they put those same people in a group, and the group was in on the experiment and argued with them and said, well, no, I think it's A, or I think it's B, not C, 75% of the people changed their answer from the correct answer to the wrong one, because they were part of a group and they were listening to other people. And they started thinking, well, if 5 people out of these 6, 7 people think it's A, even though I think that's much, much shorter, I must be missing something. So I'm going to go with their answer. So they would rather be wrong than admit that they were that they didn't think that the rest of the group was right. I always like the George Orwell quote, right? The 2 + 2 = 5. This whole idea, but the real reason behind this is that we like to fit in. But the key here is in a lot of the work we do every day in the business world, especially HR, there is no physical reality that I can check. So when you offer up, this is the answer, people have nothing to check it against. And when they don't, they look to the social network to see what it is. In other words, if you're saying this is a good change for the organization, and you don't have a good way to prove that, the people that are receiving that message are going to start talking amongst themselves and say, look, as a group, what do we think now? So social proof is a really, really big way to influence people's behavior. And as an example, getting back to that hotel washing your towels or you reusing your towels experiment, they did the same experiment again, right? So we'll make a donation. We did make a donation, but then they changed the third condition was 75% of the hotel guests in this room reuse their towels. So there's the social proof. People in this room, people like you, 75% of the guests did that. And when they said that to them, the number of people that complied with that did keep their towels, hung them back up, increased by 40%. Huge impact, huge impact. So remember, this is all about people looking around and trying to fit in. So if you can leverage social proof in your discussions, things like top companies do this. You ever wonder why when one company starts down a certain path and it's a highly thought of company, like it used to be Facebook or Google or somebody hot? Why do you think Google? That's a good one. Google HR practices end up, rolling through HR world like crazy because social proof says they're smart, they're good, we should copy them. Same thing here. What are you bringing to the table from HR that you can leverage social proof for? The things you're doing, can you point to a very well-known company that's doing that? So think in terms of comparison to high-level quality companies, and you'll be able to influence behavior better. Hope that makes sense. Now, the last one I want to talk about is probably one of my favorites because it's so weird. And it is so much into that irrational world area, right? So first of all, that picture on the screen right now is an old Kodak copier. That's when Kodak was still in business and when copiers were huge. They had their own room, their own office, and everybody had a little thing they had to go plug in to count the number of copies that were being made. And there used to always be a line there. So they did an experiment where they put a line up by a copier and they had somebody cut in line, or they waited for a line to form at a copier, and then they tried to have somebody cut in line. And they asked, they did this 3 different ways. The first way they said, hey, can I cut in line? I've got to make some copies. I'm in a hurry. Because I'm in a hurry, I need to make copies. And 94% of the time, people let them in line. Well, then they changed the conversation and they said, they had people come up, cut in line and said, may I use the copier? And that's all they said. And in that case, only 60% of the people actually let them in. So it dropped by 1/3. And they were wondering what the difference was between those 2 discussions. One is I'm in a hurry. One is I just need to make copies. I want to use the copier. So they changed it and said, okay, what if we changed to put the word because back in? So they now said, may I cut in line because I need to make copies? And 93% of the people said yes. Now think about the second and third condition there. May I use the copier? And then because I need to make copies. What new information is in that third bar? Absolutely none. Of course you need to make copies. You're at a copier. You're not going to be changing a fire. So the point being is that just adding the word because basically changed the outcome by quite a bit. And part of it is, I think as human beings, we're brought up with always having a reason for behaviors, a reason to do things. And that always follows because. You do this because. I always liked it because you end up having your parents, whenever you ask them for some sort of favor, they always said, Mom, can I go spend the night? And if they said yes or no, if they said no, they said, well, we said why? And they said, because. We're used to hearing the word because. But the bottom line is you can leverage that. How often do you use the word because when you're asking somebody to change their behavior? I'll bet it's pretty rare. I know when I check back on things I had asked people for when I first heard of this, I rarely use it. Now I use it in every email that I'm asking somebody for something. And you can do it too. You can say, because 10,000 customers have already trusted us, you should buy because it's better than those other guys. And again, remember, they didn't add any new information to because I need to make copies. It's the word because. It's because it's better than the other guys. Does that really add anything to the conversation? But it will change the way that people respond to the request. Because it comes in your favorite, because it has 1.21 gigawatts, doesn't matter. Use the word because. Look for reasons. The better the reasons you have, the better this will work. But the idea is the word because. Crazy, right? Again, infinitely variable, highly irrational. That's the people HR deals with every single day. So the other things, a couple of other areas I thought I'd touch on here real quickly is something called, I love this one, it's called hyperbolic discounting. And what it means is the future is worth a lot less than the present or the near future. And what I mean by that is when you start positioning things further out, the value of that changes, especially when it comes to incentives and rewards. So if you think about value is on the x-axis or I can never remember, is it x or y? The up and down axis is value. The time is on the horizontal. A donut is worth a lot more today than a flat stomach is, even though flat stomach is what's out in the future. So in other words, your reward for not eating the donut is a flat stomach, but that's in the future. The reward for eating a donut today is it tastes great. Your brain puts a lot more value on a donut today. And what that really means is $100 in 30 days, extra $10 in 30 days has a 10,000% more value than it does in 6 months. So when you think in terms of positioning things with people, understand that the further in the future something the payoff is, the less value it has, even if it has the same value. In other words, $10 today versus $10 in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days shouldn't matter. $10 is $10, right? But it isn't. In our crazy, irrational brains, $10 right now is worth more than $10 in 2 weeks. And one of the great things I saw on TV over the last 10 years or so that really brought this idea home was, I don't know if you remember the show, The Biggest Loser. It's gotten kind of beat up a little bit in the last year or two, but they used to do this thing where they would show people their current age versus their future age if they lose weight. And what they were really doing is bringing the future closer. They were letting people see what the future looked like now. And that changes everything, right? Because what we say is the future has less value than the present. So by bringing it in today and showing them like they do in this slide here, it allows people to emotionally and intellectually connect with that information in today, in the present, which that elevates that value. So think about that in terms of how you package your own business information, right? The stuff that you show with your employees. And it can come from why people don't contribute to 401ks, because it's in the future, right? So let's get them to make that decision today. They do that now with the defaults, right? Everybody has a default. That's why. We couldn't get people to sign up if we waited into the future. So that's the one I really like, temporal discounting. The future is worth less than the present. You could do this by running what if reports, right? So what would this look like in the future if we did this today? Again, bringing that future into the present. Tell before and after stories. So before this, after this, that way, again, brings that into the future. It show this client success with similar types of problems. And this could be you, right? All of these things bring it into the present and bring it into the personal. The other thing I do a lot with my discussions is this thing called misleading vividness. There's a great quote, or not a great quote, but a quote attributed to Stalin, and I also think Mother Teresa as well. When one man dies, it's a tragedy. When 1,000 die, it's statistics. And what this means is our brains don't do a good job with big numbers. We love to be focused on something that's easy and vivid in our brains. And a lot of times that's one story, one person's struggle. And too often we try to overload our people with communication that's all about the facts and the figures and the statistics and the numbers. And we do a lousy job with that. What we want to do is try to remember that stories are the way people remember things. Facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered if it's part of a story. And a well-written or well-discussed story is remembered far longer than any facts and figures. So when you're presenting new ideas to your employee base from HR, don't rely on this grandiose 10,000 this, 5,000 that. Tell a story. You see this all the time in politics. They've learned their lesson. Every one of them says, I met Mary on the campaign trail. I met Bob on the campaign trail. They're trying to create that misleading vividness, but it's a way our brain attaches to things. So don't be afraid to try that. Tell stories. The outcomes are also as important as the features and benefits. Link a number to a story. Give that number a name and bring emotion into the question, into the equation. There's a reason Aesop's fables are critical and important. Finally, or not finally, I'm not even sure if this is finally, but close to finally, something called processing fluency. We ignore this to our peril, but basically our brains are lazy. We're very, very lazy. We want to take that path of least mental resistance. And a good example of that is something that they did this test on. Which of these is easier to remember? What sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks, or what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals? Well, obviously, you will leave this session and in 2 days, remember what society conceals, alcohol reveals, because your brain doesn't have to work as hard to remember that. And there's a perfect example in our world if you're over the age of 12. You probably remember this scene. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. That case was won in that instant. It was won at that point because that summed up the entire trial. And it was easy, easy, easy to remember. Make sure you leverage the fact that our human brain is one of the laziest organs we have. So don't get technical. Have fun with your communication strategy. Find ways to make things easy to remember. Link to well-known images and ideas. There's reasons I picked some of the images in this presentation. Think about music. Think about earworms, things that stick with you, like baby back ribs, right? I think I'm going to go do that tonight. Because at the end of the day, we're all flawed creatures. We're victim to our internal voices and biases. We're irrational. We can be swayed and influenced through all of these techniques. And as influence designers, we have to understand those and hack that human software, right? Hack that human OS. And frankly, the last thing we should make sure we do is be intentional. If knowing all of this is irrelevant if you don't apply it. If you don't sit down, I have a piece of paper off to the side here at my desk. And on that piece of paper is most of these biases and influence techniques. And I always look at that list every time I write an email, every time I put together something where I'm requesting an idea from somebody or some help. And I make sure I touch on a few of those because I want to up my chances of compliance and getting people to change their behavior, which is what you want. So be intentional, have some fun with it, understand the human software, read those books, think about it, follow people who do this stuff for a living. It's a fascinating way to really kind of dig into that human operating system. I hope you had fun listening today. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Paul Hebert. I work for WorkStride. Happy to help anybody put together any kind of incentive reward program. I've got to throw the commercial in there, right? But anyway, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful summit at the HR Schoolhouse here. And I guess, Ben, I will throw it back to you.
Now you know exactly what I meant when I said every time I talk to Paul, every time I read something he's written, every time I hear him speak, I walk away with new ideas and new ways to actually apply them. He takes all the academic theory and things and makes them very practical and applicable and relevant to the work that we do in our space. And I'm so thankful for his approach. All right, we are on the home stretch. We have one last fireside chat today. I'm talking to Ann Fulton from Fuel 50. We're going to talk about agility from a human perspective and from an organizational perspective. And if you have been on that list of winners, getting a prize, and stay tuned tomorrow and the next day for other prizes coming out. But if you're one of those people that said, hey, the career engagement game, what is that book? That's a book that Ann actually wrote, and she donated those. So we'll be giving those away, continuing to over the next couple of days, maybe even during the session. Who knows? So I'll bring the conversation on with Ann. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of HR Summer School Fireside Chats. I am so glad you're here. If you're just joining us, don't forget to sign up at hrsummerschool.org because we'll be sharing some free resources, slides, other stuff from our speakers in the coming weeks. We'll also notify you of other contents coming up this week so you don't miss anything that you want to see. Now, let's jump into this conversation. I'm joined by Ann Fulton. She is the CEO over at Fuel 50. Ann, welcome to HR Summer School.
Hi, Dan. So cool to be on your summer school here. And I think it's a brilliant innovation. And I think everyone's going to be hungry for some learning over the summer. So yeah, well done.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm excited about it. And thankfully, it's not all on my shoulders. I get to bring some really sharp people like yourself to the forefront to hear what you're doing, to hear the work the perspective you're seeing, because you have some really interesting insights that we'll dig into. But for the audience's benefit, will you stop for a second and tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, founder and CEO of Fuel 50, as you said, we had a vision of transforming the employee career experience a few years ago, and literally wrote the book on career agility about 4 years ago. Little did we know how much agility was going to be required, from people today. I don't think any of us expected the amount of resilience and agility and what we need from our workforce today beyond any of our expectations. But I think some of those principles still stand, today as they did, 3 years ago, and probably even more of an imperative than they were, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, even.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. And I'm going to talk to you about the agility piece today, because I think that'll be a fun conversation to have. But tell us something that's not in your official bio, something we couldn't go Google Ann's name and find out, something fun about yourself.
Well, I don't know how fun it was, but I'm going to claim that I had COVID-19, right? Because that puts me in the 10%, of the population today. And unfortunately, I've been directly impacted by, COVID-19 with my next door neighbor here in London, really sadly, passing away. And I'm angry at the fact that he's a statistic at, 65, even though he's fit and healthy and amazing. But also, I guess personally being touched by it and having a little bit of a glimpse of the fear and the reality associated with it. So yeah, that's my not so fun fact.
Not fun, but still facts, still connected to that. And I think it's been interesting to watch how more and more people that I know, at first it was, wow, this is scary, but it seems very remote and removed. But as time has gone on, I found a connection here or there personally through someone that I know, and it like you, it has become more relevant, more meaningful, more touching than it was when it's just an abstract concept. So it's different when there's the face to it that you know and understand. So
I think that spectrum, right? So I mean, I barely had a flu, and my next door neighbor dies, and another friend in intensive care, and another girlfriend in the front line with the NHS, actually dealing with it day to day and getting it herself, and then having to turn back up to work 7 days later, unheard of. So yeah, there's all sorts of spectrums of experience around this, and I think not a single one of us across the globe is untouched, right? It's a common denominator for all of us right now as we're trying to adjust to a new reality.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of adjusting, I want to talk to you about that a little bit, because that's where you've spent, again, you've written the book on it. You spend your days talking to massive employers that are working through this. And so let's talk about agility for a second on that human level, because you referenced that a minute ago. What does that agility look like right now for people that are, people that are listening to this? They're HR, they're talent leaders, they're in the trenches, they're trying to serve their employee base, but also serve the needs of the company. What does that agility look like right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an awful lot of, agility from all of us. And I think we've got to go back to some core principles, that I learned at uni, in Psychology 101, that we're going through kind of a grief cycle as our reality has changed so dramatically. So you're thinking of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the shock, the denial, the anger, and then even, owning to some depression around it. And we hope to be able to help people to get to acceptance and a new normal where we're getting back to some kind of productivity. But, I think we've got to own, that everyone's going through a spectrum of emotions right now. And, that there's things that we need to do, every single one of us individually, as well as many of us, as leaders and HR practitioners, where, we've got to have a dual lens, both on, our own personal agility and resilience and productivity, as well as that of those around us. So I think we've got to cross that chasm.
I was going to say, I actually heard, it's interesting you said the grief thing. I didn't expect it to go there, but that's good. I actually heard a psychologist speaking the other day, and he said, you know what? One of the things that we've got to be careful about is judging how others grieve, because some people grieve. Me, I am the first one to crack a joke, to smile, to make, to try to bring a smile to someone else around me, because that's how I deal with that kind of thing. But other people deal with it in a very solemn or other sort of approach. And it seems like I'm being rude, maybe sometimes, things like that. And I try to be sensitive right now, especially with everybody dealing with it. But he said, we've got to realize that everybody grieves differently, and we've got to be okay with that. If someone's grieving and their way of approaching that is, they need to spend a week being quiet, not talking to anybody, just alone. They need to spend time virtually with friends right now, just talking to anyone they can talk to. Everyone handles it differently. And I think that's just a good reminder for us right now that not just, yes, grief's happening, but that everybody approaches it differently.
Yeah, exactly. Creating those connections, and as you say, allowing people to talk and express their feelings, or as you say, or to go quiet and absolutely embrace the isolation if that's what they need to do. And I think in terms of my own personal approach, and I think it's okay to accept it, is that I asked for people to send me as many bad COVID jokes as possible, because that was going to help me cope, right? was the dark humor. And it's actually a way of finding a means of coping, but it's allowing people to find those individual coping mechanisms. And as a leader, it really is just about asking the question, how are you? What's happening in your reality? And part of me is a little excited about, what we're able to do in terms of connecting with people right now that we weren't able to, even, 6 months ago, by reaching into their home lives. You see their dogs or their chickens or their children, pop up into the meetings, and and you get a glimpse of what they're having to cope with. And, everyone is coping with a different reality. Some people that are on their own in little apartments and in new cities, completely isolated, and others have got 6 in their apartment, flatmates, or, children that they're trying to homeschool. So, I think there's a real need for that deep sensitivity to what people are coping with.
Sorry, I was going to say, you'd said earlier, like, this all goes back to that first year psychology class that a lot of us had to take in college, you know, like the basics of how we see these things. But one of the other pieces of that is like the hierarchy of how we process things as humans. Like I need to be safe first before I can be, you know, then I can focus on my whatever else, you know, going up the levels. I can belong, I can feel like I'm included. And then eventually I can be, like we're translating this to the work context, I can really be engaged at work. I can actually focus and be productive and get those things done. But if I'm worried about my kids' health, or I'm struggling to find food or toilet paper, right? Again, sorry, it makes me smile. If we're struggling in those levels, though, those human levels, we can't be engaged and connected at work. We can't bring our best. We can't support people. And it's easy to make assumptions when people are coming to an office. But now, like you said, you get to peer in someone's home. You get to see what it's like, and you get to give them a little bit of grace in their
And it's starting with their individual reality, right? Everyone's reality is, you know, can be uniquely different. And, you know, we've got to help them find a way of contributing and productivity and coping, you know, with their individual realities, which, as you say, can be really, really different. And we've all got to kind of get, you know, back. And from an individual point of view, I've been thinking about it in terms of, you know, thinking like an athlete, right? You know, an athlete needs to create some routines and some disciplines. They've got to review their performance, you know, and then they've really got to focus on recharge and restoration, you know, as part of their rhythms. And, you know, if we can bring in some of those kind of, you know, daily disciplines, you know, and for us individually, it's going to help our, you know, kind of productivity. And one of the things I've been playing with myself is, you know, around routines, you know, because all of a sudden we've got a different routine. You know, we were maybe catching the bus or, you know, commuting to work or going to meetings or, you know, whatever your reality was. But now we've got a completely different routine that we're having to establish. So then it's kind of thinking about, well, what do I need to create that's going to help me get to high performance and productivity around those routines? And I've been doing a little thing called habit stacking, right? You know, so just simplifying it back, you know, it's, you know, when you brush your teeth, then you floss, and then you know, and then you do 3 other things, and then you tidy the bathroom. So it's around a habit that's such a discipline that you don't even think about, like brushing your teeth. You add 3 more little disciplines to it, and next thing you know, you're improving your productivity. So that's sitting down at your desk. You know, if you're looking at your routine there, when you sit down, you know, you unclutter, put things away, so you've got a beautiful clean space, if that's what works for you. You know, you write down 3 things. So what are the 3 little habits that are actually going to help you improve your productivity on that day, right? So, you know, to me, that number 1 is your routine. And then at the start and the end of the day is like, what worked for me yesterday? What could I have done better? And then the end of the day is like, what have I achieved? What are my wins? You know, what am I actually, you know, where have I had a high performance moment today, and capturing some of those wins so that, you know, you're building that sense of, you know, self momentum and self motivation. Because I think, you know, it's easy, you know, with that isolation and depression, you haven't got the energy of people around you. You haven't got a distraction, maybe, or you've got different distractions, e.g. your children or your chickens. I have seen that, right? I keep mentioning the
chickens. You said chickens, and I was thinking, I haven't been on that meeting, but maybe I need to join it. That would be interesting.
Yeah, it was really fun and cute, but, you know, it was still distracting. But yeah, and then, you know, from an athlete point of view, you know, the importance of recharging and restoration, and, you know, allowing yourself to down your tools, and so I think all of us have had to do a little bit more on that self-care than we would have done, you know, beforehand. So, you know, it's so easy to grab that glass of wine or that beer or that whiskey or whatever you know, but it's looking, okay, is this really going to help me? And finding perhaps, you know, potentially another routine that might be more, you know, restorative for you, like, you know, getting out for a walk in the evening, or, you know, bit of yoga or whatever it may be, that's actually really going to help you recharge, you know, so that you are going to be at your best. So, you know, those are some of the things that, you know, we're thinking about and pushing out through our software to help people perform at their best through this time. You know, so our software is about, you know, how do you be your best at work, and how do you find your future? And our future is right now, and is a radically different future, but we're still trying to help people find some of those lovely kind of personal coaching disciplines that are helping them be at their best.
So you said yoga a minute ago, and the chicken thing is stuck in my head, and I can't stop seeing a chicken every time I want to talk. But you mentioned the yoga thing, and I saw a team the other day that said, hey, we're actually doing yoga as a team, right? No one would ever come to a yoga studio like as a group and do this for work, right? No one's interested in that. But for a team, they're doing this virtually via Zoom, just the way to have some laughs, right? But also to just do something together that has nothing to do with work at all. And so I'm curious what you're seeing not that necessarily, but what are you seeing from a bigger perspective, from an organizational or a team perspective? Any customer stories that you could share, like someone doing something that's great right now, positive, uplifting, anything like that that you're running across? Because you give some really good tips on personal level, and I love the idea of habit stacking. But I'd love to hear some things, some big picture ideas, maybe from an employer perspective, that some of the people listening could take and say, hey, I could use a piece of that and apply that to our own organization.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's absolutely about, communicating, right? So right now we can't communicate too much to, for our people, or show too much compassion. So those are the things that have been inspiring for me, and I just know from our own team, the communication side of things is that a lot of my team were working remotely before, but all of a sudden, because our realities are so different, so these little, water cooler catch-ups, all of a sudden have become institutionalized into the business. And I hope that they're going to continue into the future, beyond now, so that, we're really creating those deep connections, with people on a personal level that, we're part of a prior reality, but, are important to people as we're more isolated than we have been in a long time. So to me, it's been about those connections. As far as our team are concerned, we've had to do like 1-minute dance offs, and whoever got the most mentions from their colleagues for actually making valuable contributions. It's all about the C's from our point of view. If you've made a contribution, you get to pick the theme song the following week, right? And then make everyone. Fun. And it's really energizing. It's quite fun, and if you're really shy, you can turn your camera off, right? It's a cool little energizing moment into people's day. So yeah, those kind of connections to us are more important than ever. And I think from an organizational point of view, right now, we can't communicate too much. It's got to be communicate. It's like so basic, but actually there's no such thing as over communication right now, because, we've got to reach out into people's lives and help them, understand, how the organization's coping. From an employee point of view, they want to get back control and clarity over their life, right? They want some kind of sense of normality and some sort of control, but also clarity about what this next stage is going to look like for them. So no such thing as over communicating. And we had a great guest on our podcast a couple of weeks ago that's worth downloading, and that's Rusty Roof, and he was former VP of talent at PepsiCo, and has created some amazing businesses since then, including Run Coach, so a coaching kind of app. But he was talking about our employees at the moment. It's a bit like a child that's having a nightmare, right? And they think there's a monster under the bed. And that, what do we need to do as leaders, or in that case, parents, is actually help them check under the bed, check out the fear, understand what's there, and actually turn on the light and show them that, yeah, okay, we can cope with, what we see around us. I thought that was a great little analogy of, kind of what's going on.
Yeah, well, all of that again, going back to the very first part of our conversation, that humanizes this for everybody else. We've all either been the child with that fear, or we've been a parent of a child with that fear. And so we've like, okay, yeah, I can grasp that. I can understand what that looks like. And we can, once you shine a light on it, figure out, okay, what's real, what's not, how do we adapt? How do we cope? How do we move through this? But yeah, I like that.
And from the communication point of view, right? I mean, when we started this, kind of mid-March, there were certain things coming at us, but now we're all kind of trying to get understanding as to what, what's the slow reveal of the next stage going to look like, and we're and it's like, oh my goodness, it might not be till August that I can go and visit a restaurant, or so people's fears, the goalposts are moving constantly. So it's really important that we continue that communication as to what this means for us now, what it's going to mean next week, what it's going to mean the week after that. So, it's a huge burden on all of us in HR, and in leadership, as to how we support our people through this so that the organisation survives. But, from our point of view, we're aiming to come out of this, stronger, fitter, faster. that we can be better. We can have better, employee relations as a consequence of this. I think, our personal and our business values all of a sudden become, more and more important than ever, right? We have been tested individually and collectively, around what are those values and how are we going to live them and how are we going to make decisions around, those values. All of a sudden, our business, we're so focused on transparency, right? Talking about the realities that are facing us. And fairness, those principles of, are we all in this together? What are we going to be doing? And looking for that kind of collective response around that, and with compassion. So, we've really, as a business, had to kind of almost redefine what those values are and create, a new charter as we're navigating into this new normal. But with a vision of being stronger, fitter, faster, right? Want to sail at the other side. Yeah.
So if someone wants to connect with you, Anne, wants to learn more about what you're doing, because I just realized we're running short on time. I want to be respectful of your time too. If someone wants to connect with you, learn more about what Fuel 50 is up to, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so quite easy to find me. I'm Anne with an E at fuel50.com, or www.fuel50.com, and you can find out a bit about, Fuel Futures, which is helping people on those learning journeys as they might be on furlough or looking for a new future, or Fuel Marketplace, which is really around helping a workforce respond with agility to new demands and redeployment of people and getting the right talents and skills into the right places. So yeah, we're pretty easy to find, and got a really amazing passion aligned team that are really on a mission to help organizations navigate into this new agile demanding world that we're facing. But we're focused on it being amazing, and that we think the talent experience is going to be different, but it's going to be better. We believe it's really going to be better. So it's a great chance to kind of get some new thinking around how we're engaging with our talent and the importance of talent to our future. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I was interviewing someone on the podcast the other day, and he said, we talk about this like we're losing work that was this wonderful thing. He said, in a lot of places it was terrible. Let's use this as a chance to break those things that were terrible, that we didn't enjoy, that were not fun, and look for another way to do this.
Yeah, redefining. We've never had an opportunity to really redefine our work experience as we have right now. So yeah, I'm an optimist, and I'm looking forward to what is going to come out the other side of this as we re-engage with our people in a new way, better way, real way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just want to say thank you to you really quick, not just for joining me for the session, because this has been phenomenal. Love talking to you every time I get a chance. Learn something new every time, but also because you've offered to give a couple copies of the book for us to give away during the event to people who are asking great questions, that are encouraging collaboration in chat, things like that throughout the event. So we'll be grabbing a handful of people who are really being engaged in the chats in the event, and we'll be sharing that information so that Anne can give away some of her books, because it's phenomenal. Actually, it's on the shelf back there somewhere. I should have had it on my desk for me right here, Annie, but it's right there it's on the shelf. I've read it, have enjoyed the book, and it's a really great piece. So thank you again for joining me, Anne. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Ben. Yeah, and best of luck with the summer school.
Thank you. Okay. Wow. Great conversations, dynamic discussions today. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have. We are on the home stretch here, just a few seconds left to do some closing announcements, things like that. Thank you again to our sponsors for making this event possible. We appreciate you for what you've done, for helping to make this event happen, making it free for everyone. Thank you so much to every one of you that have participated in this. Tomorrow, I'm so excited. My excitement is like here, and then every day it kind of builds a little more. I don't know where it's going to go by Friday, but here it is. It's so hard to pick a few of the sessions that I'm excited about, but a couple of them. Chevezo Cook, he's an Army officer, special operations experience. He's just a phenomenal person, really inspirational. He's going to talk about lessons learned from special operations. I appreciate him for his service, but also for his willingness to share. He mentors military men and women, helps them grow and develop and learn in their careers, but also as people. Just an incredible person. Heather Kinsey, who you've all seen in the chat in the last couple of days, is going to be here. She's going to be talking about how to support she's been our unofficial support staff. She's going to talk about the challenge of accountability in HR and how that ties into what we're doing. So a couple little previews of things tomorrow, so much good stuff. Please plan to attend, and do me a favor, share this with someone else that you think might find some value in it, might appreciate it, might get something from these great conversations we're having, not just the content, but the conversations too. That's been something I'm so excited to see every day, that building. I appreciate all of you for what you're doing here. Honored to be a part of this, bringing all of the community together. And I'll just sign off with this. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. You have value, and don't ever forget that. I'll see you tomorrow on HR Summer School.